So, John takes care of business, John takes care of design, but I do all the programming. And so taking control of our own operations meant I was going to be the sysadmin, right? And there was only one teensy problem with that, which was that I didn't have a fucking clue how to do that. And so when we started evaluating target platforms for FetLife, the only Rails sysadmin work that I had ever really done was on EC2. And so there was a convenience factor there. And that was I was like, yeah, we're moving to EC2. End of story. Right? And beyond the convenience factor, I was also I was kind of drooling a little bit over, I don't know if you can see there's a huge glob of drool coming out of this dog's mouth. But anyway, I was kind of drooling over stuff like auto-scaling and all this cool automation stuff, Chef, Puppet, whatever. And so I think that was a big reason that we wanted to move to EC2 was because I wanted to play with all those cool toys and scale our cluster horizontally and say that I was managing 50 servers and whatnot. So for these bad reasons, we decided to move to EC2. And at the time, we're serving, I don't know, about 70 million requests per month. This was a few months after I joined the company. And our initial infrastructure on EC2 was 7 web tier servers. Maybe it was 6, I don't know. But anyway, again, master-slave MySQL server, and the slave is just there for operational purposes, for hot failover, for backup, stuff like that. We're actually only querying the master. And then a MongoDB server, which we'll talk about later in the talk. And so, obviously, if we need 7 web tier servers, and we've just gone from 3 to 7, these machines that we're using on EC2 are somewhat less powerful than the VMs that we had on Engine Yard's private cloud. But that doesn't matter, right? Because we're on the cloud, so we can just scale out, right? And we did scale out. And then we scaled out more, and we scaled out more, and more. And when we first moved over to EC2, our average response time was about 220 milliseconds on average, with actually a relatively high standard deviation. So faster than Engine Yard, or faster than we were on Engine Yard, but still relatively slow. And if you don't get this joke, these guys are speed walkers. But there's something kind of funny about this picture that I noticed, which is that 2 of the guys actually have both feet off of the ground, which I thought was called running. So to make a long story short, at this point we decide, maybe we've outgrown this whole cloud thing, right? And I kind of, push my obsession with auto-scaling aside, and we start evaluating physical servers as a potential target for our next hosting platform. And so we ended up deciding on this hosting company rather, called SoftLayer. And there's a couple cool things about SoftLayer that really attracted us to them. So number one is no contracts, right? If you're a startup and you're on EC2, one of the best things about it is if all of a sudden your traffic all disappears tomorrow, you're not on the hook for the remainder of your contract, right? If you're on Rackspace, you're talking about 1 year minimum, and a lot more than that if you want to get decent prices from them. So the second thing was that SoftLayer offers 2 to 4 hour addition of new capacity. So it's not 5 minutes. It's not API-based. It's not API-based server provisioning, but it's a hell of a lot better than 5 to 7 business days at Rackspace. So our initial infrastructure at SoftLayer looks a lot like what we had on Engine Yard's private cloud. 6 machines, including MongoDB. 3 web tier servers, MySQL, master slave, and this MongoDB server. And not having really had any experience at all with physical machines, despite the fact that our benchmarks showed that this infrastructure was extremely fast, I was a little scared that there was something that I had missed, right? That maybe our benchmarks weren't representative, or maybe I just completely overlooked something. But when we flipped the switch, we were greeted with a pretty nice response time of 98 milliseconds with a relatively low standard deviation. right? So this is a lot better. I mean, we more than doubled our performance here. And so all of a sudden, overnight, FetLife goes from being this incredibly slow site to being this incredibly fast site. And we didn't do anything, right, except buy servers. And the servers cost less than what we had on EC2. So here's a fun graph of our response time from the day after we flipped the switch over to SoftLayer being compared to the week before on our EC2 infrastructure. So this light blue wavy line, this horribly erratic performance, is our EC2, horribly overloaded EC2 infrastructure, I should say. And then this nice yellow, fast, consistent line, that's our new physical hardware on SoftLayer, right? And so it was pretty clear to me at this point, and remains clear to me today, that physical machines are a lot faster than what you get on EC2. But I was kind of curious, like, how big is the difference? So I use a tool called Sysbench, which is commonly used for benchmarking MySQL infrastructure. The Percona guy, if you read the MySQL performance blog, the Percona guys talk about that a lot, use that tool a lot to benchmark various pieces of new infrastructure. And so I ran a couple of tests. The first one was a CPU test, calculating max prime numbers up to 50,000 in 16 threads. And the EC2 CPU performance, and I should say, let me back up a second and say that I'm comparing here two identically priced machines. So that, not identically, but within plus or minus $20 of each other. And so the physical machine was a dual quad-core Nehalem E5520, if you're familiar with that processor, with 36 gigs of RAM and four 15,000 RPM disks in SAS disks in RAID 5, in hardware battery-backed RAID 5. And then the EC2 instance was, fucked if I can remember the name, double extra large super high memory instance or something. What's that?
You forgot secret probation.
Right. And so, on average, this EC2 instance is about 2.5 times slower, taking 2.5 times longer to execute this benchmark, right? But what's interesting is the variance. If you look at the 95th percentile and the maximum, SoftLayer's maximum is maximum time it took to execute this benchmark was 2.5 times the average. It'd be nice if they provided the standard deviation in this tool, but nevertheless, this is what we have to work with, right? But EC2, the time it took the EC2 instance, the maximum time to execute this benchmark, was like 150 times its average. And the 95th percentile is kind of similar, right? And so EC2's performance, CPU performance, was about 2.5 times slower than SoftLayer, but it also had like a massive variability in the time that it took to execute this benchmark. The next benchmark I ran was file I/O benchmark. So this is random reads and writes. It's combined random reads and writes. And the numbers look kind of similar, right? 16 threads again, max file size, 3 gigabytes. SoftLayer performing about 6 times better. I mean, the physical machine, rather, performing about 6 times better than the EC2 instance. So, given that these machines are equivalently priced, you're paying a lot more for your horsepower on EC2, a lot more. And when you consider I/O, like 6 times, potentially. And I should say that I also ran an OLTP test where Sysbench actually fills up MySQL with data and then runs queries against it and measures the results. I took out the slide because the results didn't make sense, and so I figured there was something wrong with the benchmark. It showed about 50 times worse performance on the EC2 instance. That didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. But the machines were running the identical OS, had the same MySQL configuration, had about the identical amount of RAM. I did zero the disk on the EC2 instance before running the benchmark. So I don't know, but that's what the results were. So they say EC2 is fast enough, right? The proverbial they. But data from Microsoft, Google, and Shopzilla shows that slow sites get fewer search queries per user, less revenue per visitor, fewer clicks, fewer searches, and lower search engine rankings. Right? And let me unravel that. Right? That means that fast sites retain users better, make more money, and rank higher in search results, right? Fast sites retain users better, make more money, and rank higher in search results. And we have seen this in action at FetLife. And we have seen as much as a 1% loss in revenue per millisecond of average response time. And this is at already fast speeds of 100 milliseconds. So 20% between 100 and 120 milliseconds. And we've seen this consistently. So it's hard for me to understand why anybody would really be willing to give up any significant amounts of performance for any reason. Right? And so when I hear people at conferences talking about 500 milliseconds being the highly optimized version of a page, it's kind of like, well, you're shortchanging yourself from a business perspective, right? Because performance it's not a feature, it's a requirement, right? I mean, if you want to make money and retain your users, and place well in Google results. And so there's one other aspect of the whole EC2 argument that I want to address, and that is this notion that, yes, the servers are slower, but it doesn't matter because it's so awesomely easy to scale on EC2, right? You've got your chef and you've got your scripts, and you can bring up new capacity with the click of a button or the running of a shell script. And we did this when we were on EC2. We brought a lot of new capacity into our cluster in this kind of highly automated way, and it was awesome. Well, it felt awesome. But one of the things that I've certainly noticed since we moved onto physical hardware, onto considerably less physical hardware, is that there was a lot of overhead, a lot of management overhead associated with running those additional machines, right? One of the things that happens to us on occasion, and it's always happened, and it happens once in a while when we deploy new configuration changes or whatever, is that one of our web tier servers starts acting funny. I don't know, configuration problem, hardware problem, could be a variety of things that cause it. But the idea of diagnosing, what you suspect might be that problem on 30 web servers compared to diagnosing that problem on 3 web servers is a huge difference, right? It's probably 10 times harder. Take you 10 times longer to find. And so all this automation stuff is great. It's great. I mean, I spoke about Chef at Mountain West. I love it, and we still use it. But it doesn't help you debug production problems. And so, the fact that it may be easier to scale out on EC2 is completely overshadowed by the fact that EC2 forces you to scale out much sooner. We are still running on those same 3 web tier servers, and our traffic has more than tripled since then. And I would suspect, given the performance data that we have, that our traffic could double and then double again on those same 3 servers, just to give you an idea of the scale of the difference between what we had on EC2 and what we had on these physical, and what we now have on these physical machines.